Hi, I'm Rick Clunn. I hope you will join me on a new journey I'm going on. It's a journey back into time. It'll kind of be a journey in information about the history and the evolution of bass, B-A-S-S. Also at the same time an evolution of me, Rick Clunn. I think it'll be intriguing. Social media has taught me how much information is in the past that a lot of people don't know about or have forgotten. So anyway, join me on this journey. What it is, I'm going back to all the BassMaster magazines I have, which I have starting in 1970, almost all of them. I think that's when I kind of started, actually joined Bass was 1970, and my first magazine was fall of 1970. And it's just fascinating. Even I am kind of blown away at going back into that far back into time. But it's also incredibly rewarding. It reminds me of a lot of things I've forgotten myself. So here's the 1970, and I'm going to go through it and pick out certain things that really stuck out to me. And one of them was
the cover.
The cover stuck out to me. Oh, well, actually, I joined in 1970, and but actually the first magazines came out in 1968. So I didn't. So I don't have much of that time frame. Again, this is an evolution of my journey with the BASS.
The boat.
The boat. Oh, my director here is reminding me things. But if you'll notice, which I laughed at, even the boat back then wasn't a bass boat. Because bass boats were really kind of a weird thing that was around, but most people didn't understand them, including, I guess, Ray, Scott, and Bass. So it's strange to see a bass fishing magazine with basically a runabout. And that is really kind of appropriate, because my first bass boat was a runabout. I didn't know any better. And no troll motor, no nothing. You just blew around in the trees. But going through the magazine, I'm just going to point out things that really struck me. Is first of all, back then the limits were a lot bigger. On Rayburn and Toledo Bend, at this time frame, the limits were 15 fish a day. And they didn't have live wells. So where did they put them? They put them on stringers. And we killed them all. And so that, and if you look over here, that's millwood. That's the way Rayburn and Toledo Bend. They were full of timber. The only place you could get around in was in boat lanes that had been cut, and there weren't many of them, but also old logging roads that were there originally. So that's where I grew up fishing. I grew up fishing in trees that you were really careful. If you bumped one, they'd break into 6 pieces and come down on you like javelins. But that still was a great memory, because a lot of fish lived in those trees. The next thing I really noticed was flipping through here, and this kind of surprised me that bass went back this far, and I should have known it. I was a real conservationist back then. Some people would have called it environmentalist, and I eventually learned from Johnny Morris the difference between conservation and environmentalist. And there is a difference. But look at this. This is Pega polluter. And Ray realized, he was smart, that competitive fishing, and you'll see, really was not, people weren't sure, conservation wasn't sure whether they wanted it. And so Ray had to pick reasons, besides us just going out and catching fish and weighing on men dead, that bass was going to be a good thing for the sport. And pollution was one of his biggest issues that he really jumped on, him and Harold Sharp, which I will show you a picture of here in a little bit. Going through here too, going back into time, this just blew my brain away. Here's Jackie Hewlett from the Austin Bass Club. He was my hero when I was in the Bass Club, Pasadena Bass Club. And as you can see, and the other thing that was amazing about him was how good a fisherman he was. And that's when I realized, unlike other sports, You didn't have to be a super athlete to participate. Anybody that had the desire could participate. And that was so beautiful. And he always had that gigantic smile too. But him and Johnny Mays were partners in the Austin Bass Club. Back then, the bass clubs in Texas were humongous. They had to have over 400 or 500 members. And the two strongest clubs in the state were the Austin Bass Club, Johnny Mays, Jackie were the leaders in it, and then the San Antonio Bass Club, where a good friend of mine and a mentor, Elroy Kruger, was at. And his brothers, he had brothers. And I want you to notice through here too, all the boats they were fishing out of. They were not what we call, they were all funny little shape, low draft boats that everybody was scared of to go to on a big lake, but not these crazy bass fishermen. There's Jackie and a lot of baits. Again, see the stringers. The stringers just blew me away. Seeing back in time. Back then, Ray didn't have bass. It just started actual tournaments, and this is one of the very first tournaments that he had. And you can see all the bass boats lined up. They were all different shapes and sizes and motors. And he'd bring all the fish up on these stringers again, like he has, weigh them in, and then he'd dump them in a bunch of aluminum boats full of ice, and then he would give them away to charities and stuff like that. But still, the public was not going to have that for very long. And here's probably Harold Sharp. Harold was one of the originators of fighting pollution in bass clubs. His bass club in Tennessee was one of the leaders into really pushing that agenda and cleaning the water. All the rivers and stuff were polluted back then. You wouldn't have believed it, because you live in a modern day where we've tried to take care of it, and they've improved greatly. But he was the tournament director for Ray. He's the one that was at the tournaments and weighed in all the fish and checked, make sure you weren't breaking rules and that kind of thing. So it was, he was really an important individual, and that was probably his greatest gift to us, the sport. He gave us a real reason to be out there besides, again, just going out and catching fish and weighing them in. And here's a good example of that. Most of you won't recognize from that lake this picture. It's Lake Pickwick in Tennessee and Alabama. It's one of the best lakes to fish in this country right now. And it was dead because of mercury poisoning. And Ray Scott and Harold got on that, and like you see these magazines, he got the outdoor writers behind it. And then all the bass clubs in the country started to follow suit with Harold's Tennessee Club, and really started pushing in their area, the politicians, and hey, we got to do something about this. And you wouldn't have thought it would have made a difference, but it made a gigantic difference. And because they stayed on them. Ray even would go to Congress and with some of these groups and promote it. And he got the outdoor writers behind it. And not just for fishing, but clean waters is so important to the human kind and all the natural kind. So this was huge. I mean, looking at it and the significance. See, now if you're fishing now, you didn't even know this happened. Most of you didn't. You need to know, because it could still happen again. If we don't stay on it and keep working to do what they it was an amazing accomplishment. It just fascinates me to look through. I won't read you all the cartoons, but they're a little funny too. And this is one of the original, this is as far as I know, now I could be wrong, the original plastic worm. Or some people back then called them rubber worms, and I don't really know. It was the Cream Lure Company. And my very first bass I ever caught, some of you will remember, was on that cream worm, but was pre-rigged for you. It already had a little monofilament in it and had two little hooks come out the bottom. And I was waiting in a rice reservoir behind my house in LaPorte, Texas. And I'm up to my chest, and I didn't, you know, when you get a new lure, you go, really, this is going to catch a fish? And all of a sudden one ate it. And from that point on, I began to understand. I'm still not the greatest soft plastic fisherman in the world, but this was one of the very, very first, if not the very first. You know, Tom Mann came with the jelly worm shortly after that. That was the second one I remember, and then there was many, many others that came after that, but that was the first that I'm aware of. And here again, it's that deal that Ray knew he had to promote fishing as a savior of the water and not a taker of the water. And these are all just individuals that were given their reason. Bass tournaments save lunkers from old age or something, I don't know. I don't understand what that means. You can look at some of them. Ryder says, harvest helps bass population. Pollution is greater reason for bass loss. You know, Mississippi angler notes for votes for because there was every state was in their conservation for trying to decide which the conservation departments were going to allow us to come to that state and put on a tournament. So it was as we just learned, got over it. It was a political time in a different way, but it was still a lot of politics going on. This kind of is interesting to me. Again, you see this picture down here of all the fish dying on a stringer. So that you will see in the future magazine how we eventually address that. It's kind of, again, a neat story of the evolution of it. And you see this guy, he's got his foot on a foot pedal. And most of you know, you wouldn't even have to say you think that was forever. No, that was not forever. Before then, they were hand operated. And Motor Guide came out with a foot pedal versus his fish with both hands free. Okay, because you'd have to use, I used my foot. I stood on like a stork on one leg with my foot on top of the trolling motor and ran it with my foot. A lot of guys sat and ran it with their hand. And so the thing about the foot pedal that I eventually went to, it decreased to a significant amount the amount of times I fell over. You know, when you're on one foot and you hit a log, and the boats were a lot narrower then. These were little narrow pointed nose and rounded nose boats. So it made, again, a really, really big difference. And you can again see, I said pointed nose and rounded. The bass boats were all, and they didn't have, that's not a lot of space up there. You didn't have an extra step if you were bouncing or fixing to go out. Big boats nowadays, you have that extra step that saves you on those larger decks. Okay, I mean, I can turn to every page here and say something about it, this was, even here, this picture, that's Gritz Gresham. The few of you guys will remember, he was the writer for the Outdoor Life. Jason Lucas, Virgil Ward, not Virgil Ward, Homer Circle. They were the big magazines back then. This was not the big magazine. Outdoor Life was, Sports and Field was, Field and Stream, and he was for Outdoor Life. He was their big writer, and he's actually back then he's giving a seminar on these new looking bass boats to these people standing on the dock. Because believe me, it was years when you go someplace they didn't see a lot of bass boats, they'd go, "What is that?" You know, and then you always had the know-it-all on the dock. He'd look, could I be looking at my depth finder or something? And they'd go, "What is he looking at?" Oh, that. And the guy on the dock, I know-it-all, would go, "Oh, that's a TV. He's watching television." I'm not joking. I'm not joking. And anyway, we're to the final chapter, and here's Fred Arbogast. He was one of the original hard bait manufacturers. He actually recently made the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. Should have made it long before, but there wasn't one. So, and the reason I'm pointing to him is because he's one, a lot of you will remember and know, and it still exists today, and a lot of guys fish it, it's the jitterbug. But I owe Fred a thank you, because I would probably stayed in college and gotten a degree, and then would have been obligated to stay with whatever my degree was in, and wouldn't have. But I fished that jitterbug at night at Lake Austin in Texas when I should have been studying, and I failed out. So I think, and so I finally realized, hey, I better be doing something else, and I went fishing. I hope you enjoyed it. There's going to be many, many more.